I call this meeting to order. This is meeting number 48 of the Standing Committee on Finance. Orders of the day pursuant to Standing Order 83.1, continuing with our pre-budget consultations 2014. I want to thank all of our guests for being here for this first panel discussion. Colleagues, we have two panels today and we also have votes, so we'll be a little compressed in our second panel. We have, first of all, we have the Canadian Airports Council. We have Mr. Marc Laroche. Welcome. From the Canadian Electricity Association, we have Mr. Ron Gentle. From the Canadian Home Builders Association, we have the President, Mr. Bard Golightly. Welcome. From the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, we have the President, Mr. Brad Woodside, and Mayor Fredericton, I believe, from Mike Allen's province here. And we have from the Large Urban Mayors Caucus of Ontario, the Chair, Mr. Jeff Lehman, who's Mayor of the City of Barrie. Welcome as well. Thank you so much for being with us. You each have 5 minutes for your opening presentation, and then we'll have questions from all of our members. And we'll start with Mr. Laroche.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm here today as Director Representative of the Canadian Airports Council, whose membership of 45 airport operators is a key component of safe and secure travel for more than 90% of the commercial passenger traffic in the country. My day job, I'm President and CEO of the Ottawa Airport. Je suis reconnaissant de la possibilité de préciser notre
I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to present our pre-budget thoughts to you. Because of the time allotment, I will accent only the general theme of our proposal, that is to say, the impact of government services funding on airports in terms of our ability to meet expectations and compete.
Aviation infrastructure. And while we are in a good position in Canada. We are 20 years into a model that has seen a transfer of the cost burden from government to the traveler, who now broadly funds the industry. Responsibility for security screening remains partly in government's hand. To fund the screening activity, the government charges air travelers' fee, despite the fact that aviation industry is truly a national issue and the cost of this security should not be borne by a single sector. The air traveler's security charge paid by passenger is designed to fund CATSA, the Crown Corporation that is charged with security screening, and it's our understanding that the fees collected have amounted to $1.8 billion between 2010 and 2013. These revenues go into government's general fund, and it's somewhat difficult for CAC to confirm what portion of ATSC goes to CATSA, and if it has been receiving the full amount for its mission. According to the National Airlines Council of Canada, from 2010 to 2013, $136 million in accumulated surplus was not directed to CATSA. In simple terms, it is CAC's view that CATSA has not been properly funded for growth at the expense of the travelers who continue to experience longer delays and wait times. The CAC would also like to see adequate resources for another critical airport partner, the Canada Border Services Agency. From CBSA, we are seeking increased value for travelers from innovative programs like automated border clearance kiosks. These kiosks have been introduced at our largest airports with millions of dollars invested by airports to improve the passenger experience. Similarly, around the world, countries are cooperating on trusted traveler programs that allow governments to provide better security with fewer resources by concentrating on travelers that represent the greatest risk. Our government partners mentioned above in Transport Canada need this work to be supported. Currently, our throughput statistic at peak times for screening and processing passengers are simply not competitive with throughputs being achieved in the U.S. and in Europe. We have other files in our submission, briefly a request to review federal infrastructure funding rules that exclude national airport system airport projects to benefit from airports' capital assistance program for small airports. NSA airports, the smaller ones, should be eligible to apply for funds in the same way that any other entity could. We also have a long-standing request to support arrivals duty-free, similar to growing numbers of airports around the world. This would not only enhance passenger convenience, but it would also repatriate sales, grow employment, reduce airline operating weights carried, and result in faster turnaround times. Really, there's no downside to this initiative, but rather many positive outcomes. I will finish by touching on the topic of cost competitiveness. The decision earlier this year by the province of Ontario to raise its fuels tax is symptomatic of a bigger challenge in Canada. When it comes to cost that gets passed on to air travelers, an in-depth assessment of the negative impact that these numerous taxes and fees have on the higher cost of flying in Canada compared to flying in the U.S. is badly needed. Sunwing, the Canadian airline,
1 minute left.
has announced that it will be flying from Buffalo, a border airport, instead of a Canadian airport to take Canadians to at least 2 Southern Sunshines destinations. If this doesn't set off alarm bells, then what will? It's time to address the high burden of government fees and taxes that are specifically aimed at air travel. Again, federal level, we also have airport rent, and we'd certainly support efforts to review or revise the currently $290 million burden that gets passed on to travelers. So final thoughts. Aviation is an important enabler of economic activity in Canada. This is an industry that pays for itself and then some. The bottom line is that aviation enables Canada to participate more fully in the global economy. We need to acknowledge the role the industry plays. We need to stop the leakage to airports located south of the border. We need to reduce the amount of taxes and fees layered on air travel so that we can remain competitive. And we need to have an aviation industry that encourages Canadians to fly from Canadian airports. We need a competitive industry that facilitates growth in inbound international tourism and travel, which will result in significant economic benefits for Canada and for the government. Merci.
Merci. Merci pour votre présentation.
Thank you for your presentation.
Mr. Gentle, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to speak with you today about the Canadian Electricity Association's recommendation for Budget 2015, and specifically how they will ensure prosperous and secure communities and support and protect critical infrastructure. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Hydro One. And prior to Hydro One, I served for 31 years as a member of the Ontario Provincial Police in various roles, my last being the Commander of Investigation and Support Bureau, so I'm very familiar with the challenges in securing our communities and critical infrastructure. I'll address recommendation number 6 in CEA's pre-budget submission, and Francis Bradley, CEA's Vice President Policy Development, who's joining me here today, will replace me at the mic to address the others. Electricity, as part of the energy and utility sector, is one of Canada's 10 critical infrastructure sectors as identified by Public Safety Canada. In recommendation number 6, the CEA is proposing 2 measures to enhance the protection of electricity critical infrastructure. On the cyber front, the CEA is recommending that Budget 2015 increase funding for Public Safety Canada's Cyber Incident Response Centre, or CSIRC, a national coordination centre that facilitates information sharing, support and advice relating to the prevention and mitigation of, preparedness for, response to, and recovery from cyber events. Increasing CSIRC's capacity and capability would enhance its ability to support the protection of CI facilities from growing and increasingly complex cyber threats. The other recommendation relates to the growing problem of copper theft from electricity facilities. Recently, thieves broke into a live, fully energized transformer station to steal copper grounds and components. A flashover occurred and severely damaged the facility. Had any person been on site, serious personal injury could have resulted. The cost to repair the station, the result of the theft of a few $1,000s worth of copper, is in the tens of millions of dollars. The most common charge for this type of incident is theft under $5,000, basically the market value of the copper component stolen. The same charge is for stealing a bicycle. The CEA is calling for an amendment to the criminal code to create new sentencing options more proportional to the full range of impacts of these crimes. We've circulated copies of a CEA policy paper that was released earlier this year to provide you with additional information on the issue. Francis?
Bon, merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ron. I'm going to give you a little idea of our other recommendations. First of all, the 2015 budget should, on a long-term basis and a sustained basis, promote energy efficiency. In addition to having a positive effect on household budgets, energy efficiency increases and improves the competitiveness of businesses and industry by making available a more profitable option to reduce emissions. The CEA recommends that the 2015 budget renew the funding through the Energy Efficiency Board. And recommendation number 2.
Renew funding to continue R&D in areas that support the capabilities of modern grid infrastructure. NRCan's Office of Energy Research and Development the Clean Energy Fund, and the Eco-Energy Innovation Initiative have been valuable tools for funding and advancing energy technology innovation, R&D, and demonstration projects in key areas, and we would like this important work to continue. The next is renewal of funding beyond 2015 for NRCan's Climate Change Adaptation Platform. The Adaptation Platform is a forum for collaboration on climate change adaptation, its priorities, and it equips decision makers and key industries with tools and information.
1 minute.
La recommandation numéro 4 indique
Recommendation number 4 indicates that we must continue to support the harmonization of regulations between the United States and Canada to improve the North American integrated grid. And
integration of electric vehicles. We're calling on the federal government to establish targets for the integration of electric vehicles into the federal vehicle fleet and to renew funding for Canada's Automotive Partnerships Canada program. Les recommandations de l'OCE pour le budget de 2015
recommendations for the 2015 budget correspond to the principal concerns of the committee and also to what was published by our association earlier this year, Vision 2050, the future energy future for Canada. This report points out the crying need to take necessary measures, so Canada will be able to provide sustainable, affordable electricity.
Review, and we look forward to your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For your presentation, we'll now hear from the Canadian Home Builders Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Bart Golightly. I'm Chief Operating Officer of the Christensen Group in Edmonton, Alberta. We're a residential development company. I'm speaking today on behalf of all my colleagues across the country in the Canadian Home Builders Association. Canadian Home Builders represents more than 8,500 member companies from coast to coast in new home building, home renovation, and residential development. Our industry generates more than $120 billion in economic activity each year and supports over 900,000 jobs for Canadians, directly contributing to the economic health of families and communities across the country. First, I'd like to touch on the importance of federal infrastructure investment in relation to the affordability of new homes. The new Building Canada plan is important to home builders, to our customers, and to the communities in which we are part. It is particularly important because federal investment in infrastructure acts to reduce the cost being levied on new home buyers through municipal development taxes, which are a major factor in driving up new home prices and the unfortunate part of the new market fundamentals. CHBA applauds the government's robust investment in core municipal infrastructure, roads, transit, water and wastewater systems, and encourages ongoing investments focused on these core areas. Second, prosperous communities require new households, particularly young working families and new Canadians, to be able to enter the housing market and become homeowners. Unfortunately, it is these younger Canadians and families, those hardest hit by the economic downturn, who face increasing challenges when it comes to home ownership. Young buyers who are at the start of their working lives are the best able to responsibly take on a long-term debt in the form of a housing investment. Yet this is the very group most adversely affected by tighter mortgage rules. These rules, coupled with the inherent challenge of saving for a down payment as house prices rise much faster than incomes, means an increasing number of young working people and families are being locked out of home ownership. The tightening of mortgage rules was implemented to stabilize the housing market. With that now achieved, CHBA believes that first-time buyers need and deserve special consideration when it comes to mortgage rules. This would support their home ownership dreams and contribute to prosperous communities. Reflecting this view, CHBA recommends that well-qualified first-time homebuyers should have access to insured 30-year amortized mortgages. Current rules requiring qualification for the 5-year mortgage commitment are quite sufficient to safeguard against debt overextension. We estimate that approximately 85,000 households would be added to the pool of potential homebuyers by such a measure, at no additional cost and little additional risk to the federal government. Related to this issue is the issue of ever-increasing government-imposed costs on housing. While most such costs are linked to other levels of government, the federal government could improve affordability from coast to coast by ensuring that taxes levied by provincial and municipal governments on new homes are GST exempt. Currently, federal GST applies to new home taxes, levies, charges, and fees imposed by other levels of government, amounting to a tax on tax, amplifying the excessive level of taxation on new homes. Such an action would demonstrate the federal government's commitment to fair taxation of Canadians and also signal its concern about how rising new home taxes are reducing affordability, particularly for younger people and families seeking to achieve new home ownership. I'll end with one final recommendation in the key area of home renovation, a $60 billion a year industry that's undermined by cash operators who evade taxes.
Okay, 1 minute.
Cash operators undermine legitimate business and harm consumers and reduce government tax revenue. CHPA therefore recommends a modest targeted home renovation tax credit to tackle the underground cash economy. An ongoing federal tax measure requiring receipts would undermine cash operators. As past federal programs have shown, even modest incentives can dramatically suppress the underground economy. Careful structuring of incentives could ensure that costs would all or mostly be offset by increased tax revenues. The purpose of this is not stimulus. It would be a modest measure to address the underground economy with minimal fiscal impact. Such a measure could address key socioeconomic policy priorities by focusing on first-time buyers, aging-in-place seniors, and or those undertaking energy efficiency renovations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll go to Mr. Woodside, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, ça me fait plaisir d'être ici.
I'm extremely happy to be here with you today.
Opportunity to convey our thoughts on Budget 2015. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities is the national voice of municipal governments across Canada. We represent the elected leaders of 2,000 municipalities who serve more than 90% of Canadians living in big cities, small urban centres, and rural and remote communities. Our goals are simple. We want to strengthen the services that families rely on, keep our communities safe and vibrant, and build the foundations to a stronger, modern economy. Our cities, our communities drive Canada's economy. They're the hubs for environmental and social innovation. Time and again, we've shown that when a stable, consistent, and long-term framework is in place, investing in our hometowns creates jobs and improves the quality of life of Canadians. We've seen it fighting the recession and rebuilding our infrastructure through a permanent and indexed gas tax fund and a major cost-shared investments in roads, bridges, transit, and other core infrastructure. The 2015 federal budget represents a real opportunity to move beyond one-off agreements and provide a sustainable framework for strengthening Canada's hometowns and moving this country forward. Investing in local infrastructure provides a clear and measurable return on investment while addressing the biggest gaps hindering our economic competitiveness. According to the Conference Board of Canada, improving our roads, bridges, and water systems generates up to $1.20 in real GDP growth for every dollar invested. FCM will be providing a submission to the committee focused on partnering on infrastructure, but in my limited time today, I want to focus on a very specific infrastructure issue, protecting Canadian water. New federal wastewater regulations will require upgrades to 1 in 4 wastewater treatment systems in Canada. Municipal leaders have supported the goal of protecting Canada's water resource and the improvement to the environment that will result. The costs associated with the implementation of the regulations, however, are beyond the reach of municipalities alone. Based on FCM cost estimates, future capital expenditures of more than $18 billion will be required over the next 20 years as a result of this federal initiative. There will also be additional costs to municipalities for assessments, planning, and ongoing operations. Just to give the committee members an idea of the challenge, some of the committee members in Mr. Saxton's community, for example, in your riding, you face over $700 million in the next 5 years alone to upgrade wastewater treatment plants. And Mr. Bryson and Mr. Kenny as well, Nova Scotia municipalities are going to have to invest $218 million in the next 5 years. Mr. Rankin and Mr. Cullen's BC totals cost about $1.75 billion over the next 5 years. And in Ms. Boutin-Sweet's home province of Quebec, 30 wastewater treatment plants will need to be replaced in the next 5 years for a total estimated cost of $1.13 billion. So you can see the severity of the issue. I recognize these numbers are significant, but I assure you that municipalities are ready to do their fair share, and the solution we are putting forward is responsible and still feasible in a balanced budget scenario. FCM is recommending that the budget establish a dedicated fund for wastewater treatment projects required due to the new wastewater regulations, and that all orders of government contribute in a cost-shared plan. This partnership would see new federal investments of $300 million annually and a commitment of 20 years to assist with the capital costs. I'd like to spend some time with you as well discussing how we can continue working together to make Canada a welcoming and an affordable place to live. Together, we can create vibrant and welcoming communities where people want to live and work, start business, build connections, and contribute. Housing that is affordable for newcomers, young families, the middle class, and seniors lays the groundwork for a healthy community, and it makes good economic sense. The housing sector represents 20% of Canada's GDP. A stable and secure housing system is essential to community and economic growth, and for every dollar invested in housing, we earn back $1.40 in GDP. The federal government currently invests a much-needed $2 billion a year in affordable housing and homelessness programs. However, funding agreements are expiring rapidly while capital repair deficits continue to grow, affecting Canadian families living in 600,000 social housing units. High home ownership costs and lack of rental housing are also putting the squeeze on Canadian families. Protecting federal investments in social housing and creating incentives to increase rental housing will help keep vulnerable seniors in their homes and out of the health care system. Make housing more affordable for the 1/3 of Canadians who rent and take the pressure off the housing market and household debt. We are ready to work together to create a healthy and sustainable housing system. Budget 2015 provides a unique opportunity, Mr. Chair, for the Government of Canada to become champions of Canada's hometowns. We look forward to working together to seize this opportunity, manage the risks before us, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you for affording me this opportunity to make this presentation. It's good to see you outside of Edmonton, I must say. Okay. And I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sir. It's always good to see you in Edmonton, too, though. City of Champions, yes. Well, we're undefeated this year in the NHL so far. Yeah, we'll go to Mr. Lehman, please, from the Mayor of City of Barrie.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of committee. Je suis le maire de Ville de Barrie. I'm also the chair of the Large Urban Mayors Caucus, which is comprised of the mayors of the 26 largest cities in Ontario, the cities with over 100,000 in population. So we represent about 67% of Ontario's population. Wanted to start by saying today that we're very encouraged by the federal government's focus on ensuring prosperous and secure communities, and that investment in our cities is one of the surest ways that we can strengthen our country's economy and ensure a long-term prosperity. Specifically, what we would like to speak to you about today is that we need job creation to grow and diversify that economy, investment in our infrastructure to end gridlock and adapt to the impacts of severe weather, and we need a real commitment to affordable housing in Canada. Ontario's big city mayors believe that although all levels of government are working to create jobs and stimulate the economy, too often we're doing this in isolation. We're in need of a diverse and robust job strategy, both in Ontario and in Canada as a whole. So as mayors, we're calling on our partners in the provincial and federal governments to work with city leaders to develop a comprehensive job strategy. This would include actions to address labor market reform through skills training and apprenticeship programs, as well as immigration reform. Coordinated international trade agenda shared by federal, provincial, and municipal governments, and infrastructure investment that targets the problems that hold our economy back. And specifically, those are gridlock and transportation infrastructure in Ontario's largest cities. We as mayors are united on the need for new investment in both roads and transit, in both our largest urban areas and our medium-sized cities. Gridlock is costing us jobs, it's costing investment, and it puts us at an economic disadvantage. We're very encouraged by the federal government's announcements of infrastructure plans. However, it does remain unclear as to whether the funding announced represents a drop in federal support for this critical priority, as the allocation of the funding is yet undetermined. We're concerned that the purpose of these funds may be diluted by making many more types of infrastructure eligible, such as pipelines, and we really encourage the government in the budget and in subsequent rollouts to focus on infrastructure investment that has the best return on investment in the economy. Another growing threat to the security of our cities and their infrastructure is the increasing number of severe weather events. Adapting and hardening our infrastructure to respond to the impacts of climate change is no longer the stuff of long-term planning or disaster movies. It's impacting us today. The floods in Toronto and Calgary last summer cost each city tens of millions of dollars, not to mention the human costs of destroyed homes and disrupted lives. With damage of over $5 billion, the Calgary flood is Canada's costliest natural disaster ever. The cost to our economy is extensive, and the threat to the safety of our residents is very real. So we need a forward-looking approach that ensures adapting to climate change is incorporated into infrastructure planning and decision-making at all levels of government. And while we need to invest in the roads and pipes that keep our cities working, we also need to consider the basic needs of the people who live there. We're finding middle-income families in our cities are priced out of reasonable housing. Worse, lower-income Canadians cannot find housing at all and face long wait times for social housing. Municipalities need the support of CMHC and associated funding to both maintain the existing stock of affordable housing and to begin to address the backlog and wait lists present across Ontario. In addition, I would note there's innovative approaches to affordable home ownership that can be explored through federal tax policy that can support lower-income families, giving them pride of ownership and building equity. But it's only through a meaningful investment in capital projects in the affordable housing sector that we can begin to address the crisis overall. So in conclusion, I want to say that the challenges facing Ontario's big cities are the same ones facing Canadians and cities across the country. To move forward, we must put investment in infrastructure at the heart of our national economic strategy. Our country's changing. When municipalities were formed, this country was one quarter of the population lived in cities. And today that is reversed. Now 3/4 of Canadians call cities home. You know, my own city delivers 60 different services to people, but we are still governed and funded by a 19th century legislative framework. We simply don't have the tools we need to deal with the challenges we're facing. And I'll give you a specific example on investment. Changes to Canada's tax regime may be effective in stimulating pension fund investment or private investment in infrastructure. This is a major opportunity that the federal government can assist cities with to help reduce the infrastructure deficit. So I'd urge you to consider these investments and innovations in economic policy to ensure prosperous and secure communities for the benefit of all Canadians. And I thank you very much for your time, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Colleagues, we will do 5-minute rounds as we are somewhat compressed in our time. And we'll start with Mr. Cullen, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all our witnesses. Mr. Lehman, when I saw the name of your group, I had a different expectation of maybe who was coming. Bad joke. A question through you, though, is there a specific ask, I know you may want to reconsider the naming, but is there a specific ask with respect to adaptation for the cities? You mentioned a couple of the recent impacts on infrastructure due to climate change. I may have missed it in your presentation. Do the mayors of this group of mayors in Ontario have a specific expectation or ask within this budget request?
Our strategic direction would be that infrastructure investments, particularly in the area of stormwater protection, are made, and this is everything from floodways to urban stormwater management. We are also seeing in energy infrastructure the need to harden our energy infrastructure to prevent the kind of blackouts that we saw during the ice storm following flooding. Those are two areas where we would like to see a focus in infrastructure investment.
Thank you for that. Mr. Woodside, if I've got a rough estimate on the numbers that the FCM is asking for with respect to improvements in wastewater, but starting on principles, is it the contention of the Canadian mayors that the federal government has brought in new rules that have cost implications to them, but no new money to the table? Am I poorly representing the scenario from the FCM's point of view?
I don't think so, but I would say that that the costs that will be incurred by municipalities across the country is much greater than had ever been anticipated when we start looking at what we have to do to bring it up to standards.
And that's where you get the $18 billion figure.
Yes.
So rules without the money is challenging for municipal budgets that are already stretched. And correct me if I'm wrong, do most of your cities operate under balanced budget legislation?
Yes.
In that you can't run deficits?
That's correct.
Interesting. Okay, so a rough estimate of the numbers you presented today is expecting the federal government over that 20-year period to cover approximately a third of the costs of these improvements that are required?
That's correct, sir.
And is that a typical funding relationship that you have with the federal government?
That is one that we certainly subscribe to. We don't think any level should be responsible or have to take on the burden all to itself.
So as we're heading into surplus, or maybe there already, depending on who you believe, the federal government's got all sorts of initiatives that it wants to spend money on, or income splitting and the like. Why make the argument for funding to go your way when we're already having some transfers from the federal government towards municipalities?
Well, I think the funding going our way is actually your way as well. I mean, what we're here promoting is our hometowns. And these belong to you. They belong to federal members, provincial members, and of course municipalities. But we are right there in the trenches every day. So when we strengthen what we do, it's actually strengthening you as well.
The one taxpayer role. To Mr. Golightly, a question around some concerns you raised, and I'll address them as concerns about the housing market writ large. There's a lot of speculation as to why it is becoming increasingly inaccessible. Certainly, market by market, Vancouver, many cities in Alberta, Toronto, are somewhat different realities than other parts of the country. But you expressed some concerns over recent policies that were announced making it more restrictive, particularly for new home buyers to get into the market. You find the 10-year requirement is too restrictive. Am I synthesizing that properly? I don't want to put words in your mouth. It'll come on automatically.
Okay.
It's magic around here.
I'm not sure of your reference to the 10-year, but to try to answer your question, we're seeing the cost of new homes rising exponentially faster than the cost of the rate of income, particularly for the new home buyer, for the first-time buyer, and for the new Canadian.
So thank you, Chair. Some would argue that it's been in the past too lenient rules that has allowed that housing price to increase so dramatically. Could one make the argument, and I suppose I am making the argument, that perhaps loosening the rules further will only exacerbate the problem? Mr. Flaherty was one to often comment on, he had in fact phoned banks at one point, suggesting that their rates were too loose and that it was encouraging a housing bubble in the market.
Yeah, we're recommending a judicious approach to this, where we're targeting it specifically at the group that needs to get into the market. They still need to qualify. They still need the 5-year rule. We're not talking about reducing their ability to make the debt service. We're talking about increasing their ability to actually get into the market at all. We're watching people being frozen out into their early 30s at least. So we're not talking about reducing the entire mortgage rules scheme. We're talking about targeting.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Cullen. Mr. Saxon, please, if you're around.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being here today. My first questions will be for the Canadian Airports Council. And I've noticed, as a frequent traveler, that security lines in certain Canadian airports are continuing to get longer rather than shorter. And I understand that other airports in other jurisdictions in other countries handle many more people and much larger volumes, yet do so more efficiently. So my question is, how can Canadian airports take best practices and learn from other airports so that the lines can be shortened and that travelers can move on to their flights and destinations quicker?
Thank you for that question. Canadian airports is not responsible for passenger screening. CATSA is. So we'd certainly encourage CATSA to look at best practices. What they are telling us, CATSA is a Crown Corporation, what they're telling us is that they're not funded for the growth that we're seeing in air passenger travel. So what you're seeing in increased delays is in fact happening, and that is what one of our principal requests is that they be funded sufficiently for growth. Another issue that CATSA raises is says, well, we follow regulations that Transport Canada makes. So there's kind of an issue there where they say we would like to do best practices, and I know of a Canadian company that has bigger throughputs, and he cannot work in Canada. Basically, he can work in Schiphol, he can work in the States, but he cannot work in Canada because the regulations will not allow him to screen that way. So there's different techniques, and we think that that is the direction where they have to go. And Transport Canada and CATSA have to work together to find those solutions, and we encourage them to do. In the meantime, in the short term, the summer lineups are going to get very long next year, and CATSA says if we don't get any funds, expect that you're going to be missing planes passengers. Toronto Airport has already asked to fund out of their pockets some increased screening times, and this is a very slippery slope because the passengers are already paying for that fee. And now if you ask the airports to pay for that above and of that fee, they're going to be paying twice again.
Okay, moving on to your next ask, which is on-arrival duty-free shopping. I've seen it in Asia. It's very successful. And it doesn't seem to, first of all, it's much more convenient for the traveler because they don't have to cart bottles of liquor around the world with them. They can purchase them on arrival, and also it gives them a chance to keep the local economy, keep their money in the local economy rather than overseas. But however, there have been some municipalities that are concerned, or the province, I should say, is concerned about losing business as a result of this. What is your explanation for that?
We don't believe, if it is, it's very minute, and many provinces have already agreed that they don't see that as an issue, and we are prepared to roll it out as a pilot in the provinces that will, and the provinces that won't will come around very quickly. People will not, you're not taking away from going to the provincial liquor store. It's an opportunity. They're already buying their bottle of scotch in Mexico and bringing it over. Why not give them the opportunity to buy it in Canada and get the sale? It's an easy ask. I think it's an easy fix.
Okay, thank you. My next question is for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Mr. Woodside. And Mr. Woodside, if you ever decide to leave the municipal business, you could always go into radio broadcasting. You certainly have a voice for it. But I just want to, number two on your ask, that's a compliment, by the way. Number two on your ask, partnering on important wastewater system upgrades. You rightfully pointed out that in my community, there will be a significant investment required in this regard. Now, what sort of, when you say partnering, what sort of partnering are you referring to?
We are actually looking at the financial portion of the partnering. As I stated, it really isn't or shouldn't be up to any one level of government to take on this financial burden. At $18 million, it's just too much. So municipalities are willing to step up to the plate in terms of a one-third, 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 which we have been doing for quite some time and seems to be very acceptable and very successful.
Okay, and what role do you see public-private partnerships playing in this funding?
Okay, just very brief answer, please.
Not very much at all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Saxon. We will go to Mr. Bryson. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Recently in Edmonton, we met with Mayor Iveson, and he explained to us the massive needs to invest in water and wastewater treatment and the climate change imperative. And he told us that the total Build Canada Fund would only cover about 10% of the national needs to upgrade. Is that either Mayor Lehman or Mayor Woodside? Is that consistent with your thinking or your numbers?
It would be a very small portion, for sure. Whether it's 10% or 12 or 15, but it would be a very small portion.
And this is something I met a couple years ago, with the mayor of Carbonear, Newfoundland, who was pointing out the climate change damages to potentially to roads going in and out of Carbonear. This is something in Alberta. This is something in Fredericton,
yeah.
Barrie. This is a national issue of that we're seeing. In terms of Mayor Lehman, you've said that we need to invest in and prepare our infrastructure for climate change. We're placing our communities at risk and setting ourselves up for huge bills if we don't prepare. That's really important. So you're saying that investments now are going to save a lot of money down the road, and that in fact it economically makes a lot of sense to invest before that damage or further threat.
Yes, without question. The the insurance industry has been driving us as cities to make these changes. And you know when the insurance people get nervous, it's real. I think the damage to the economy, though, in terms of critical infrastructure that goes offline, whether that's power infrastructure, transportation, water, you know, putting the entire economy of Canada's largest city or Calgary on hold for a week because of the length of time it takes to respond. I mean, the economic multipliers of that length of delay and that kind of damage are extensive.
Have as line items in federal budgets climate change adaptation as a line item in the budget, and that we recognize the cost. You know, there's going to be an investment we have to make, and start preparing as a matter of sound budgeting.
I don't think, yes, absolutely. I don't think there's any question that this is a new cost to all of us. And the impacts are unquestionable in terms of what we've seen in the country, across the country in the last couple of years, and it behooves us to plan for it.
On the housing side, housing is one of the FCM's top priorities this year, and the need for affordable housing. And it's not just a big city issue, it's a small town and rural Canadian issue. And Mayor Dave Corkum from Kentville explained this to me recently when we met. For the home builders, do you see, or do your members see, an opportunity to participate in this investment, this needed investment, to build affordable housing, and potentially to get REITs involved and some of the other institutional investors in helping fulfill that need? Do you see an opportunity to create jobs and growth for your members?
It's a simple answer. It's partly an income question, and it's partly a supply question.
Sure.
So with respect to the home building industry being able to provide the services to construct the product, unquestionably, they'd be there in spades to be able to do that. The sustainability, though, of that kind of housing would have to be looked at carefully, so that the ongoing residency of that can be maintained.
Certainly. You mentioned energy efficiency, and the eco-energy retrofit program, did that help your members at the time? Did it create jobs in terms of people renovating their homes to make them more energy efficient?
It did. Those kind of things have a further reach, though, than just assisting our members. What they're really doing is reaching out to Canadians who want to improve their own affordability in their own home. So while it did generate economic activity, what it did do is make housing more affordable.
Bring it back. It was canceled a while back. Would it be the kind of program we ought to
Just
renew?
a brief response,
Yes.
please. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. We'll go to Mr. Keddy, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome to our witnesses. A couple of questions for Mr. Golightly. You know, we had introduced for a period of time the home renovation tax credit. You mentioned in your comments that you thought it had minimum fiscal impact cost to the government. I just want to break down a little bit on 3 points that you made. One was protect affordability for new residential construction. 2 was to tackle the underground economy and home renovation. And 3 was support skilled trades development and advance innovation in housing. And I guess my question is, as it relates to the former home renovation tax credit, would that not work towards actually serving all 4 of those asks? Number one, you'd bring your underground economy contractors, which there are untold amount of. I couldn't guess. I'm going to ask you for a number so you can come up with it. But how many there are out there? It would force them into the skilled trades, because a lot of them would have, you know, quite frankly, unskilled or journeymen or maybe good carpenters, but not skilled carpenters working for them, and certainly not journeyman carpenters working for them. And it would also help on the 3rd point for advanced innovation in housing, because these guys aren't watching what's current. They're not they're not advancing the trade. So I'll stop there to give you time to answer.
To address your question about what I believe you're asking me, or we're posing the question as to what the value is of the underground economy. That's something that we could get that information or do our best estimate on it. So I would appreciate the opportunity to be able to provide that for you at a future time. You raise a very interesting point in that the program would touch all of those areas you inventoried. And I hadn't thought of it in that perspective, but it would serve double, maybe triple duty on that. I think the other piece of it that's important is we landed up previously and would again be in a situation where we're delivering quality, and we strongly believe that the tax revenue to the government, the potential is there for it to potentially not be revenue neutral, but be revenue positive for the government.
Thank you. And I guess my other question for you is, you're making a suggestion that new builds could be GST exempt. So my question to you is, what are you asking from your provincial governments and your municipal governments? Is it only going to be an exemption and a tax break from the feds, or are you looking for a tax break from your provincial and your municipal governments as well? Because it can't be simply one level of government paying for it all.
It's a fair point. What we're saying, sir, is that we're looking at a tax-on-tax situation right now.
I understand how it works.
Okay.
But
so
what are you looking for from the rest of them?
All orders of government have to recognize this, so we're not just simply loading one tax on top of another. I think you're right.
Yep. The other question for the Urban Mayors Caucus, Mr. Lehman, you mentioned something in your comments, and I'm not quite sure where it's coming from, about funding for pipelines. But there is no national funding program for pipelines. Pipelines are totally privately funded. So what did you mean by that?
So it's our understanding that under the Building Canada Fund, some of the national infrastructure projects could include energy infrastructure. I stand to be corrected if the government's clarified that.
Well, to my knowledge, there's no existing pipeline in the country that's been nationally funded, but I could prove to be wrong on that. The final question is to the Canadian Electrical Association on your last priority, which is security. And we understand that you've got a huge business operated from coast to coast to coast that has some tremendous security challenges. Why is it a federal responsibility?
Okay, sorry, there's just a brief time left, but Mr. Bradley, if you want to respond to that.
Sorry.
Certainly, the criticality of electricity is underpinning the Canadian economy. Evidence the 2003 power outage. When your core infrastructure goes down, it has impacts in the scale of billions of dollars on the Canadian economy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Keddy. Ensuite, Madame Boutin-Suite, s'il vous plaît, pour 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame Boutin-Suite, for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to you, gentlemen, for being here today. I'm speaking to you in French. Everybody has their earpiece in. Congratulations, Mr. Whitsign, for your new position. I hope that it's going well. As a spokesperson for housing, I've traveled a great deal throughout Canada lately to talk to people, to talk to communities, and see what their major housing problems are. People spoke about the cost of rent, that there wasn't enough rental housing, not enough housing in general, that there was an increase in homelessness. The Federation has been asking for some time for the federal government to deal with the housing crisis. What do you mean by housing crisis? Could you talk to us about the main causes of this housing crisis?
For the question, for 2 decades, we've really seen housing prices skyrocket while building of rental housing has stagnated and social housing is eroding. The lack of options for all Canadians has put housing affordability at the center of our economic challenges, and at the end of the day, this is a challenge that can be met through predictable long-term housing investments and a partnership between all orders of government. And I think it needs to be said as well that a number of the programs are expiring. And we, at the very least, are asking to stay where we are and not go backwards, because there's a serious problem now.
Oui, je suis parfaitement d'accord avec ça. D'ailleurs, j'ai une motion.
I agree entirely with that, and I have a motion to that effect. Some agreements are expiring. I spoke with several individuals who live in co-ops who are dealing with this issue. I'll give you two examples in my own riding. There's a housing co-op where I was talking with Ms. Caron Parent. She can't work. She's cut all of her expenses, and her housing subsidy is going to end in 2016. In 2016, her rent is going to go up by $200 from one day to the next. In another co-op in Montreal, the Cloverdale Co-op, Pierrefonds, which is the largest in Canada, in 1 year, subsidies are going to end. The end of the agreement is in 1 year. 270 families are going to be affected. Nearly 1,000 people are going to be affected by the expiry of the agreement and by the expiry of the subsidy, and their rent is going to go up by about $350 on average per month, and we're seeing that throughout the entire country. There are some provinces like Quebec which are talking about helping those people. We're not going to let them go to the street. So essentially, the federal government is downloading onto the provinces. Eventually, provinces will no longer be able to handle it, and municipalities will have to deal with it. Are municipalities going to be able to deal with that issue? And if so, how?
I don't think that municipalities are really capable of handling anything by themselves, just as the federal government or provincial governments. Really what the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is all about is creating partnerships, softening or lightening up, the challenges that we all have, because it all goes down right back to our communities. That would be the best way to answer that question. And getting off text a little bit here now, I basically feel so strongly on this that I think affordable housing is a human right. It's a human right in this country. And in a country that is so blessed, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense that we have this many people without a roof over their heads, or this many people in Canada that can't afford a roof over their heads, and those that are taking so much of their budget for that housing is not fair either. Just my personal observations.
Monsieur Lehman, est-ce que vous avez quelque chose à ajouter?
Mr. Lehman, do you have anything to add?
Colleague from Fredericton's comments. One of the ironies of a rising economy is it squeezes people out. And in our cities, what we're seeing as mayors are people who were never struggling with housing costs before struggling today. So it may seem paradoxical that during a rising economy, we actually have a greater problem. But the affordability issue is exacerbated by the current economic condition. I would quickly add that I believe there are regulatory changes and tax changes that can significantly benefit the program as well. It isn't just a straightforward ask for capital funding. I believe there are more innovative approaches that can expand the supply of affordable housing and indeed home ownership in this country.
Merci. Merci, Madame.
Thank you. Thank you, Madame.
Around.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here, and a special welcome to Mr. Woodside, a fellow New Brunswicker who's here. And just for the purposes of Mr. Saxton, if you had a career in radio broadcasting, that would mean your career would come full circle, wouldn't it? Yeah. So, anyway, I'd like to start with you, Mr. Woodside, when you talk about the third, and the third, which has been the traditional funding mechanism we've used for infrastructure, especially in New Brunswick and other municipalities. With the federal wastewater regulations and other types of things, what is your view on the small municipalities who maybe don't have the fiscal capacity, which I have a number in my riding, who are very small, less than 6,000 population is my biggest municipality, but they're dotted all over the place. So they would have a significant inability probably to meet the third, and the third if they ran into a major issue. So has there been some discussion about how that might work under the program?
That's a great question, and it has come up. As a matter of fact, on other programs that involve the one-third, 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 that doesn't necessarily mean that some of the smaller communities even have a third to come to the table, and that's always been a concern. I think that we have to pay extra attention to those smaller communities that don't have that ability. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the costs are so extremely high, and as has been mentioned, we can't run a deficit every year. We have to balance our books, which I think is a good thing. However, it's going to be very, very taxing on the smaller communities, and some of the ones that you're talking about in New Brunswick, I'm very aware. And some of the bigger ones on the coast, it's billions of dollars as a result of what's been going on for so long. So it's about time we clean the environment up, and we're all going to have to work together. I keep saying that, Mike. Sorry, Mr. Allen. I keep saying that it's all about partnership. I mean, if we come in here and expected you to do it all, that's not going to happen. We all have to have some skin in the game, if you will, and that's what we're prepared to do. And we may have to work together for some of those smaller communities that don't even have the third, that can't afford the third.
Maybe the federal, provincial, territorial component would have to be something we'd have to think about. But I want to go to the CEA because this is going to link back to this, because there was some discussion about disaster mitigation where CEA was talking about the climate change adaptation, and there's the infrastructure funds have been expanded a little bit in terms of the categories, so they can be spent on disaster mitigation as well. And you know, when you look at some communities that are impacted, quite often they can take those. I'd like to know where CEA is coming from on the disaster mitigation idea from an infrastructure standpoint. What are the specific things that the CEA is concerned about? Because I would see a lot of the disaster mitigation would be municipalities who would actually be undertaking this effort. So where's CEA coming from on that?
That's an excellent question. I mean, in all instances, every emergency event occurs in communities. So our asks, specifically with respect to climate change and adaptation, at this point in time have to do with the adaptation platform that's under Natural Resources Canada. And so what we're concerned about is really our ability through that platform to work with all of the stakeholders to be able to work on longer-term approaches to adaptation. And the issue we see is this and a number of other programs that we mentioned in our brief that are sunsetting. And these are areas where the Government of Canada has shown a great deal of leadership in the past by running these activities and funding these programs, and for our ability to continue to do so in the future, we believe requires them to kind of double down and agree to continue funding these when these programs sunset.
Okay, thank you. 45, and to the last to Mr. Lehman, you talked about investment and stimulate private investment in infrastructure. Just can you lay that out for me, just how you would see that happening? Because Mr. Woodside sort of suggested that maybe that wouldn't work in all cases, but can you...
No, it's not appropriate in all cases, but there are certain types of municipal infrastructure and energy infrastructure that are ripe for particularly pension fund, long money investment. Transfer tax is a major issue. I believe that with reform to some of the tax regulations, we can actually create vehicles to facilitate that investment. The money's sitting there, it wants in, it's very interested in infrastructure investment, and sometimes there are those tax or regulatory burdens in the way. It would take me a lot more than 45 seconds, but I'd love to follow that up with you. Thank you.
If you would mind submitting something to the committee on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, you can do it through myself or through the clerk. We'll
Thank you.
sure all members.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Mr. Rankin, please.
Thank you to all of the witnesses. Fascinating. I want to ask, if I could, first of all, to Mr. Laroche of the Canadian Airports Council, the sort of a macro question that your presentation invited, I think. You talked about the air travelers' security charge going to CATSA, $1 billion over 3 or 4 years. You talked about Ontario raising fuel taxes. Bottom line, I live in a community near the American border. We're losing many, many people to the United States that go to Bellingham. My family lives in St. Catharines. Everybody uses the airport in Buffalo. and Niagara for the simple reason that we've priced ourselves out of the market. So my question is, do you have any suggestions for this government in this budget as to how we can address this drain of resources south of the border?
Well, first of all, we have to stop increasing these components that we add on the price of aviation. It is having a very detrimental effect. The second thing is that the Canadian Transportation Act is an opportunity to review all these taxes and charges that we put on, and we have to look at other ways to finance it. It is, for example, airport rent. It has a cost. It's transferred back to the passenger. We are paying basically 10% on all the revenue we raise. So even if we collect air improvement fees, for example, for expansion, we're paying 10% of that amount that we collect to the government. The government is not paying for the renovations or the expansion of our airports. If it was, then it would be normal that our rent increases. So if we're paying for those expansions, we shouldn't have to pay another time on it.
Very helpful. Mr. Golightly of the Canadian Home Builders Association, this is building on Mr. Keddy's question, I hope. You talked about, I was intrigued with your recommendation actually about the $60 billion home renovation industry and how if there were just a small tax credit for home renovation, we might be able to capture some of the money that's now going to what you termed cash operators to evade taxes. I thought that was an excellent suggestion. Have you put any numbers to this? Have you had a chance to examine what your specific recommendation might be, therefore?
I don't have those kind of values with me today, but we certainly can put our head down and come back with specifics on that.
I think it's an excellent idea. I would encourage you to do so. My next question, I suppose, is to Mr. Woodside of the FCM or to Jeff Lehman of the Large Urban Mayors Caucus of Ontario. I was intrigued by how often in your presentations the words climate change came up, and I was intrigued by mitigation and adaptation. But do you think the government should be dealing with its share of the causes of climate change? Is that something that you think would logically follow? And have you taken a resolution, either of you in your mayors or FCM, on the issue of what Canada should be doing?
Okay. Climate change wasn't in my presentation, but something that I'm certainly prepared to talk about, something that is very, very important to all Canadians, and we all have a piece to participate in. There are so many examples across the country. Jeff was talking about Calgary. I can bring it right into New Brunswick just a short while ago where we were without any power for 6 days. We are seeing things in this country that we've never seen before. And I think that it's not just a matter of dealing with it today, but we also have to take preventative measures to bring down CO2 levels, for example, that are causing the greenhouse gases. We all have a role to play. We do it in Fredericton, where we have the 8th freshest air in the world. But yet I've challenged my community to do more for the environment.
Well, with respect, your submission does refer to climate change. You say the TD Bank Group estimates extreme weather events alone will cost Canadians $5 billion a year by 2020. You talk about working with municipalities to establish critical disaster mitigation strategies, which you've linked to weather and climate change matters. So, you know, this federal government, according to a report yesterday by independent auditors, won't even reach its own targets for emissions, hasn't brought the oil and gas industry together to talk about emissions. I mean, surely we should be dealing with causes, not just effects. Would you not agree?
Okay, well, brief response, please.
Look, there's plenty of blame to go around when it comes to the planet and what we're doing and what we're not doing, and we all have to share in that responsibility, and Canada has to do its part, just like any other country.
Okay, thank you. There's 10 seconds, Mr. Lehman, if you want to add a 10 second.
I would simply say that as mayors, we're the ones who have to cope with the reality of the impacts of the severe weather. We now need a national strategy to do this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rankin. Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
Thank you all for coming. Mr. Rankin is sucking me in. I'm taking the bait. Yeah, this is an interesting topic of discussion. We contribute to 2% of the CO emissions. So we could have a long debate. I really don't want to get into that, whether or not we've done our share to the reduction of that. The point of the matter is that ultimately the effect is negligible. So I'm going to fire it right back to you. What are you doing as municipalities to combat the effect? It's easy to say that the government needs to make all these changes and have the money. And I should also point out as well that it was only because that we had a budget that was being balanced that we are able to handle what happened in Calgary. And incidentally, Calgary, I checked the web, and coming from CBC, they explained the situation in Calgary, which was just, the things were melting on the mountain. We had a little bit of rain. We had a couple systems that blocked, and I mean the stars lined up the wrong way, and we had this horrendous flood. So the fact that those things have always happened, and those things will continue to happen. But if you're convinced that we need a contingency plan from the federal government, what are the municipalities doing to augment, and maybe you go ahead, Gary.
I can certainly tell you what we're doing in my municipality.
Yep.
And we've reached every level of conservation according to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities goals and objectives, one of only probably 5 communities in the country. We have certainly reduced our footprint, and we're not like an industrial kind of place, but yet 5 years ago I challenged the community to do better and to do our share. And they've really accepted that. So that's what we're doing.
That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm going to lead you in another direction, Mr. Lehman, if I just could. Sure. Again, it's the Building Canada Fund is a $55 billion plan, which is the first time, to my knowledge at least, that the federal government has embarked in the future to assist municipalities. The reason that was possible was that this government has made it a priority to get our house in order. And we can only do that because we have the money. I mean, there's only one taxpayer, be it the municipality, be it the province, or be it the federal government. So the federal government has embarked on something that enables you as a municipality to do some of those things that you're talking about. What's your responsibility as a municipality to match those funds? I'm asking the question. It's a loaded question, but I want you to answer that too.
Sure. In my opinion, the one-third, one-third, one-third model is the right way to go. I believe it is our responsibility, all 3 levels of government, to address those kind of challenges. I praise the federal government for balancing the budget. I think that's hugely important. I think it now allows investments to be made that can address the big challenges facing the country. I do happen to think this is one of them. And as municipalities, my quick example, you asked about effects. We just built a couple of bridges over our Lakeshore Drive that were oversized because the stormwater flows, according to our Conservation Authority, have pretty dramatically increased. Basically, the modeling said you got to build them 30% bigger than you used to. There was a $6 million price tag associated with that, but that's the kind of effect that it's already having on our capital budgeting.
Okay, about 30 seconds, Mr. Venkestra.
Fortunate thing about this place, yeah. We're so pressed for time, but I guess I recognize that, and I applaud you for the efforts that you're making too. But are you focusing enough on the municipal side? And that's the point I wanted to make, of getting your house in order as well too. Because the only way that we can pay a third, and the only way that the province, New Brunswick's a perfect example of that, or municipalities, when you get together, do you talk about those important things of balancing your own budget to this so that you can come to the table with a third, as the federal government has, and I hope as the provincial government has?
That is absolutely. Yes.
We've never run a deficit.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Venkestra. And we'll go to Mr. Adler, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Appreciate you all being here this afternoon. It's a very interesting discussion. And however, I do want to, in the very limited in time, I'll focus, I guess, initially on Mr. Golightly. after I first got elected in 2011, a fellow came to me, and he was wondering why he couldn't take advantage of the housing renovation tax credit. And so he pulls out a piece of paper and he says, here, this is the renovations I did on my home, and here's a piece of paper to show that I paid for them. And it was just a, 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that said, yes, there was like a number 500, 5,000, 2,000, 3,000, and at the bottom, the contractor received in cash. And he was curious why he wasn't eligible to take advantage of the housing tax credit. And how much of a problem is the underground economy? Because I hear from people all the time who tell me that they've got trades coming into their home to renovate their kitchen, to build an addition on their home, and they just will not work legitimately. They want the job only if that person's going to pay cash. How much of a problem is that in the home building industry?
Well, it's a good question. As I indicated earlier, I think we could put further study to that question. If you want a quick opinion, I would suggest that at least half of the renovation business currently in Canada is being done on a cash basis. That has serious ramifications in terms of safety, in terms of quality, in terms of taxation, all those things.
Well, it's much more than a taxation or revenue issue. It's quality of workmanship, it's quality of materials, and some of the things that go into homes are health related, and if they're getting knockoff goods there's no quality control whatsoever. So what can we do as a government, as home builders in partnership, to make sure that we can get that 50% ultimately down to zero, to make sure that everybody complies, all trades comply with the law?
We as home builders and renovators would love to see it down to 0%, as you talked. Remember that when we talk about the ramifications of this, we're also potentially, the cash economy is not even pulling permits for this. So when touching on your comment earlier about safety, well, I mentioned safety, I guess, but quality, there's checks and balances there in the system, were the system to be followed. With respect to our recommendations here today, what we're actually suggesting is, at least as a first step, is to target it to new home buyers, maybe new Canadians, aging in place seniors, target to specific people who are specifically and unintentionally pressed as it stands right now. I think that would be a step in the right direction. And then evaluation can be made to see how does that affect inbound tax, outbound tax, what does it do to government revenue? I'm convinced that the government revenue will go up and the quality and the safety of the work will also improve.
I suspect you're right on that.
Okay, 1 minute.
Okay, let me also ask you about the trades themselves. Are home builders finding it difficult to attract the people with the right qualifications to work in the trades in order to build? I mean, listen, there's a huge demand out there, and there's not enough supply to satisfy all that demand. And in markets like Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary, that's why we're seeing home prices the way where they are. Is there a trade shortage, and how do we fix that? And don't tell me temporary foreign workers.
There is a trade shortage, and the disappointing part about that is that it's difficult for trades to move back and forth across the country into different provincial jurisdictions and have those trades recognized. We need to go past the Red Seal program and have many of the other trades recognized as bona fide and therefore able to work in different parts of the country. I'm not talking about the temporary foreign workers at all. So
yeah, okay.
So I hope does that answer your question?
It's satisfactory for now, yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I want to, on behalf of all the committee members, I want to thank our guests in our first panel for being here. Thank you so much for your presentations, responding to our questions. Colleagues, I will take a break in a couple of minutes here. I just wanted to get someone to move the motion for the budget for the, okay, moved by Mr. Cullen. All in favor? Okay, opposed? That's carried. Thank you so much for that. We'll suspend for about 5 or 10 minutes here. Thank you. this meeting back to order, and I want to thank our witnesses for appearing early. The reason for that is we do have votes at 6 p.m., so this is going to be a condensed panel, and I want to give our guests as much time as possible to present and hear from members of Parliament. We have 5 organizations presenting in this second panel here. We have the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships. We have the President and CEO, Mr. Mark Romoff. We have the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association Incorporated, Mr. Frank Swedlove. We have from KPMG partner Stephen Beattie. From Union de Municipalité de Québec, Mr. Robert Coulombe. Bienvenue. From the Wellesley Institute, we have Director Mr. Michael Shapcock. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being with us here this afternoon. You will each have 5 minutes for your opening statement, and then we will go to questions from members. And we will start with Mr. Romoff, if you're ready, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is what we call in Canada just-in-time delivery. I apologize. It's been one of those days. Thank you very much. So, good afternoon, and thank you all for inviting me to come and speak to you today. What I'd like to do is speak a little bit about Canada's public-private partnership, or P3, experience, the role of the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships, and then the opportunities that we see to expand and strengthen the effectiveness of P3s across Canada, and to take advantage of Canada's experience and expertise and take it global. Today, all countries around the world are facing large infrastructure deficits at a time of serious financial constraint. In fact, in a recent study, the McKinsey Global Institute estimated the global infrastructure deficit at US $57 trillion. And this is a likely an understated estimate. Canada, too, as you know, is confronting a huge infrastructure deficit across all levels of government. At the same time, sound modern infrastructure is key to Canada's productivity and economic growth, and ultimately central to a more prosperous and globally competitive Canada. This reality has placed a premium on innovative approaches to infrastructure development, and this has led to public-private partnerships, or P3s as we call them, moving increasingly to center stage in Canada. In fact, Canada enjoys one of the most active P3 markets in the world, with 219 projects in procurement, under construction, or in operation, with a value of over $86 billion. I've included a chart in my notes, and you'll see there that these projects are active right across Canada and in a broad range of sectors. And this large and diverse portfolio of projects has also enabled our domestic industry to develop the experience and expertise that is now positioning itself as a recognized and respected global player. The timing is excellent as international P3 markets, and notably the United States, are now taking off. So what are public-private partnerships? Simply put, P3s are partnerships between governments and the private sector to build public infrastructure like roads, bridges, hospitals, schools, or to deliver services. P3s can be structured in different ways, allocating varying degrees of responsibility for design, construction, financing, maintenance, and sometimes operations to the private sector, while always remaining public ownership and control. Experience has shown that P3 projects are delivered on time, on budget, and at less cost, and are better maintained than those projects procured using the conventional design, bid, build approach. This translates into greater value for money for Canadian taxpayers. With our large portfolio of projects and our track record of success, Canada is today seen as a global leader in P3s, with a model which is recognized internationally as best in class. And other countries looking to establish P3 programs regularly come to Canada to study our approach. So why is this? There are several reasons. We have learned from the experience in other jurisdictions, particularly the UK and Australia, where this model was initiated, and adopted their best practices that have clearly strengthened the Canadian approach. Canada does P3s for the right reason. Value for money is the key factor in determining whether P3 is the best procurement option. P3s are not a panacea, but when they demonstrate best value for money, they consistently deliver high-quality outcomes. Canada also has strong public sector institutions in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick, and federally with PPP Canada, all with dedicated P3 expertise and robust procurement practices that lead to efficient, open, and competitive bidding. No other country has this governance structure in place. Most importantly, however, our P3 projects are achieving results. I've already mentioned some typical measures. P3 projects are on time, they're on budget, and at less cost.
1 minute.
But Canadian projects are delivering economically as well. We did an assessment of the last 10 years in P3s and found the following results. These projects have created more than 290,000 jobs. They've contributed more than $25 billion to the Canadian GDP, and they've led to $7.5 billion in tax revenues for the federal and provincial governments, and produced $9.9 billion in savings over traditional procurement. A number of issues are important, I think, for this committee to consider with respect to the 2014 budget. There are 5 I've listed here. 1, municipal and Aboriginal capacity building. These 2 communities across Canada are the generation of next projects, and they have capacity issues. The model is also complicated for small projects. We need to look at developing a P3 light model. I mentioned Canadian expertise, and I think the opportunity is excellent now to go global with our capability, and we're working with government on that. And we're very focused on the next generation of talent, so we're focused on women in infrastructure, young leaders in infrastructure, and students across the country to ensure they can come out of those institutions ready to go. And finally, Mr. Chair, I would mention that it's important for the Government of Canada to address the P3 funding disincentive, which is a product of the different allocation of funding depending on whether you make application through the New Building Canada Fund or the P3 Canada Fund, because one provides funding up to 33% and the other only 25%, so it disadvantages P3s. I'll finish off by saying we commend the Government of Canada for the long-term infrastructure plan, a huge move in the right direction, and the New Building Canada Fund and the replenishing of the P3 Canada Fund are outstanding initiatives.
Thank you.
And we continue to find the government a great partner.
Thank you
for
so
us.
much. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your patience.
Okay, I appreciate that very much. Thank you so much. We will move on to Mr. Swedlove, please.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I am very pleased to participate in these pre-budgetary consultations on behalf of the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association. The association is a voluntary association which represents almost 99% of Canada's life and health insurance business. The industry provides a wide range of financial security products to almost 27 million Canadians and manages about 2/3 of all pension plans. This insurance includes life insurance, annuities, and supplementary health insurance. The industry has over $1.2 trillion in assets invested globally, with roughly $615 billion invested in Canada. My remarks today will focus on the importance of supporting infrastructure investment in Canada and will highlight measures that we believe the federal government can take to increase the supply and attractiveness of infrastructure assets for large institutional investors like Canada's life and health insurers.
Chairman, included in our pre-budget submission. A second was to establish a tax credit of 15% for long-term care insurance. This will provide a clear message to Canadians that they need to take responsibility for their long-term care, as this is not covered under the Canada Health Act. The third item was to seek elimination of capital taxes on insurance companies. We are the only G20 country that has such a tax, and it is inconsistent with encouraging insurance companies to build up their capital. I will not make any further comments on these 2 items, but if there are any questions during the Q&A period, on these matters, I would be pleased to respond to them. Getting back to infrastructure, Canada's life and health insurers are one of Canada's largest and most stable investors in long-term assets, including infrastructure. Our strong appetite for such assets is driven by the fundamental nature of our business. Life insurance and pension products often results in several decades, up to 50 years or so in some cases, where the insurer is receiving premiums prior to paying related claims. As well, a number of life insurance products have investment returns as a core component of their design and are used by Canadians as an efficient way to save for retirement or for other needs. Insurers must invest the premiums they collect from policyholders to pay claims and benefits on their policies and to cover their operating capital costs. To the greatest extent possible, insurers seek to match the term of their liability with their assets. The importance of a robust and well-diversified long-term investment market in Canada for life and health insurers cannot be overstated. In 2012, Canada's life and health insurers held almost $540 billion, or roughly 90% of our total domestic assets, for the long term. These investments often support longer-term capital investments, including infrastructure investments, which are critical to creating economic growth. Canada's life and health insurers also invest directly in infrastructure assets. Currently, the industry holds roughly $6 billion in infrastructure assets. This only represents about 1% of our total investments, and we have a strong desire to do more. Estimates suggest that Canada's currently has somewhere between a $350 and $400 billion infrastructure deficit. This infrastructure deficit will need to be addressed if Canada is to realize its full growth potential in the coming decades. The importance of encouraging investment in infrastructure and other long-term investments has also been recognized internationally by the G20. For example, at the G20's most recent meeting of finance ministers, they agreed to create the Global Infrastructure Initiative to increase quality investment, particularly infrastructure. We are very supportive of this international initiative and Canada's role in it. Closer to home, we believe there are a number of areas where the federal government could play an important leadership role in helping to close the infrastructure deficit. At the most basic level, governments in Canada need to ensure that infrastructure projects are brought to market in a timely and predictable manner. Undue delays and uncertainty around decisions regarding whether a project will proceed hinder the private sector's ability to play a strong partnership role in helping to finance infrastructure projects.
Okay, 1 minute.
L'une des principales façons dans le secteur.
One important way that the private sector helps finance infrastructure is through public-private partnerships, or P3s. P3s are an attractive funding mechanism for long-term infrastructure projects such as hospitals, airports, roads, bridges, and government facilities. P3s have been shown to deliver projects on time and within budget. In addition, P3s are an attractive funding option for governments because they limit the upfront initial investment required by governments to build public infrastructure. The Canadian government has played a very helpful and proactive role in promoting and incenting P3s across Canada through the creation and funding of P3 Canada. We applaud the government for this, but believe that more can be done.
Infrastructure needs in Canada is at the municipal level, as Mr. Romoff has noted. These projects tend to be relatively small. The current P3 model in Canada is not well suited to smaller projects like these. Some of the challenges relate to the complexity.
If I could ask you to conclude, please. Yeah.
Okay, lack of standardization of P3 project documentation. The lack of standardization and documentation limits the attractiveness of smaller P3 projects for potential investors, as the size of the potential deal may not be adequate to compensate for upfront costs. The complexity of structuring smaller P3 deals is also a barrier for potential issuers who may not have the requisite expertise to navigate through the P3 process. As a result, we believe Canada should embark on a program to harmonize P3 documentation. We recommend that P3 Canada take the lead by developing standardized P3 documentation for P3 projects under $50 million. Another initiative would be to help increase the potential fit for P3s for smaller deals.
Mr. Swedlev, I'm sorry we are way over time here. I've got to move on. If I could just ask you to conclude, please.
Okay, could I complete it? I'm sorry.
I think you want to hear from the members in terms of their questions, so my recommendation is you conclude your presentation and we'll move on here.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry, can I complete my comment just what the recommendations are then? Okay, if I can't, then I'll move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Beattie, please.
Thank you. We in this generation have been the beneficiaries of the foresight and investment of our parents and grandparents. And I truly hope that as we move forward, we are able to give that to our children and grandchildren as well. And this is a real challenge in today's environment. Our perspectives have shortened, and we are working very, very closely with what's happening today rather than what's happening in the distant future. Most of us have spent the majority of our adult lives in times of relative excess capacity, and now we're moving into times of relative scarcity. And that means we have to ask different questions, and it means we have to seek different answers. It's often useful to think of infrastructure in three different areas: social infrastructure, economic infrastructure, and the infrastructure deficit. The infrastructure deficit is perhaps the most insidious. It's beneath our feet, it's under our streets, it's in the walls. We really haven't invested what we should have invested over the last decades, and we face a big bill. If we ignore the maintenance needs of our existing infrastructure, we do so at our peril. And this is something that I think the committee really needs to take into account as it's looking at new projects versus existing projects. The other part of the infrastructure deficit lies in things where capacity increases have been postponed, and that puts a brake on the Canadian economy. It keeps us with a friction in the system that keeps us from achieving our true potential. If the last 20 years of infrastructure investment have focused on interurban development, the next 20 years will focus on cities. And nowhere is the infrastructure challenge facing cities more great or more evident than in urban mobility. Whether it be pedestrians, cyclists, transit, cars, goods movements, or services movements, and these last two are often forgotten in the discussions, it is truly important that we allow the cities to flow the way they have the potential to, be it economic inclusion through the ability to get to a job or the ability of a small electrical contractor to get to a customer. Both are equally important. What we really need in cities is a couple of decades, not a couple of years, of serious investment in order to allow cities to reach their true potential. We need to achieve a national consensus on the need to invest in infrastructure, its benefits, its costs. And we're seeing this around the world as countries develop national infrastructure plans that lay out a prioritized set of projects and programs that allow people to address social, economic, and the infrastructure deficit issues. Consensuses are very hard to achieve, and they're hard to maintain, but they can be an incredibly powerful way to guide progress. Similarly, when things change in the external environment, it also allows you to change directions. And I would take you to the experience of the UK. They have actually they're now completed their second national infrastructure plan, and they have actually changed directions quite severely. Had they not had that first one, they would have been at a complete loss as to what to do. The final point is about paying for it. And there are two concepts, I think, that are quite useful for your deliberations. These two concepts generally get muddled up by 70 or 80% of the people who talk about these issues. One is called funding infrastructure, and that's who ultimately pays for it, be that the taxpayer or be that the user. The second part is the financing of infrastructure, which pertains to how to pay for the initial construction. And when those two terms get muddled up, the debates end up completely at cross purposes. And I would please ask, as you go through your deliberations, that you remember those two concepts.
1 minute.
Now is a brilliant time for Canada and for Canadians to be investing in infrastructure, and I believe we owe it to those who follow on to make those investments today and for the next 2 decades. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Beatty. Ensuite, Monsieur Coulombe, s'il vous plaît, pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Coulombe, for 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, the Vice President, ladies and gentlemen. The Union of Quebec Municipalities eagerly accepted the invitation to participate in your committee's work on community safety and prosperity. This is a priority for all of Quebec's municipalities, which have been maintaining the efforts they've undertaken over the last few years. Founded in 1919, the Union represents municipalities of all sizes in all of Quebec's regions. Its mission is to be a leader at the national level for local governments to be effective and independent, as well as to enhance the role of local elected officials. Its members, who represent more than 80% of Quebec's population and territory, are grouped into affinity-based caucuses: local municipalities, central municipalities, smaller cities, large cities, and municipalities in the metropolitan area. When it comes to infrastructure, we consider that that's a tripartite responsibility, be it to stimulate the economy in the short term, lay a foundation for a sustainable economy in the long term, or to develop attractive places to live for ourselves. Investment in infrastructure are important levers to ensure our prosperity. Efforts that have been undertaken over the last few years must be maintained and remain a priority. This priority must be taken on and sustained by all three levels of government, because we all have a stake in ensuring conditions that favor a strong, sustainable economy. Recently, the UMQ has worked on municipal infrastructure. The starting point was an in-depth study conducted in 2012 by Deloitte and E&B Data. This evaluated, or rather assessed, the state of municipal infrastructure needs. The findings are clear. Municipal infrastructure stock is an asset base that represents more than $200 billion. Municipal infrastructure deficit is now $34 billion. The needs are therefore great. To refurbish and maintain our assets and keep them in good shape, all three levels of government will have to increase their tripartite investment by $3 billion additional dollars. Finally, municipalities are laboring under an unfair burden because they're footing 76% of the net funding bill for municipal infrastructures. This analysis demonstrates the scope of the challenge of renewing public infrastructure in a context where the state of public finances make these kinds of decisions ever more difficult. The study also demonstrated that government programs in infrastructure had a significant impact on slowing down the growth of the deficit as of 2008. Whereas the deficit was increasing by more than 5% a year up until 2007, programs implemented as of 2008 stabilized the deficit and reduced its annual growth to more or less 1%. These programs produce results and solidify our partnership. However, we have a long way to go, and we all have to keep up the pace. The new long-term infrastructure plan set up by the federal government is an important asset because it will allow us to maintain our efforts and to maintain the last few years' efforts to catch up. However, the current level of investment is not meeting existing needs. That's why the Building Canada Fund review clause, which re-examines the situation every 5 years, is an excellent option. The level projected by the new long-term plan should be considered a starting point and not a ceiling. Needs and projects. The study presents an analysis of municipal infrastructure which had not been done for many years, not by the municipal government or other levels of government. It demonstrates how great the needs are. It demonstrates the need to continue to seriously invest in municipal infrastructure and making sure that they're up to date and safe, which contributes to job creation, the GDP, and Canada's sustainable development. Municipalities continue to invest important amounts in infrastructure because needs are great. However, it is more important than ever that other levels of government maintain and even increase their contribution. However, certain components of the Building Canada Fund have not yet been implemented in Quebec because an agreement has not been reached between Ottawa and Quebec. The communities component for municipalities of less than 100,000 inhabitants has not yet been rolled out, which means that no municipal projects can be undertaken right now. In this context, the UMQ reminds governments of the importance of implementing various projects that have been unduly delayed and invites them to come to an agreement quickly. To conclude, we've taken on, with partnerships at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels, an important challenge over the last few years, which is to rehabilitate infrastructure in order to support our economy and build desirable places to live. Serious efforts have been made, but we cannot lose sight of all the work that still remains to be done. Let us stay the course over the long term and maintain a strong partnership. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Scott, please, for your presentation.
Thank you very much. My name is Michael Shapcott with the Wellesley Institute. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I want to speak about another dimension of Canada's infrastructure, our housing infrastructure. And I recognize that often when housing is raised as an issue, that there tends to be a focus on house prices. Like members of this committee, I do talk regularly to various economists, and I'm sure we could assemble a panel and have a lively discussion on whether or not there's a bubble and whether it's bursting or not. But I think that misses some important issues around the rest of Canada's housing infrastructure and some of the very serious issues being faced by Canadians because of housing challenges. For instance, the latest National Household Survey reports that 3.3 million Canadian households spend 30% or more of their income on shelter, which is the threshold at which people start. When they start to pay that much for shelter, they have less money for food, medicine, childcare, transportation, other necessities. We know from the National Household Survey that 982,200 households, or about 7% of all households in Canada, are living in housing that's substandard, is not fit for human habitation. And we know that 6% of all households in Canada, 793,585 households, live in overcrowded housing, housing that is dangerous for the people living in the housing because of the overcrowding. Now, of course, housing is one of the most important factors for individuals in terms of their personal health and well-being. We know that. The research confirms that. It's also very important for the health and safety of communities, for the economic health of communities, to have a good and diverse supply of housing. The federal government was very helpful a couple of years ago in pointing out that affordable housing investments are actually one of the smartest investments that government could make. In the 2009 stimulus budget, when the federal government did put 2 years worth of housing funding, $2 billion over 2 years into housing, and then tracked that spending, they noted that the economic multiplier from that housing investment was high or higher than just about any of the other federal investments that were made. Roughly speaking, for every dollar that the federal government invested, it achieved $1.50 in economic return. So for all sorts of good reasons, housing is a very important issue and needs to be part of the infrastructure discussion. The observations that we put in our written brief in the summer as we submitted our brief to this committee do note that the federal government has not been paying attention to the current needs of Canadians in terms of the deteriorating housing infrastructure, especially since the recession of 2008. We've seen a flatlining of federal housing and homelessness investments, starting with the 2013 budget, where the federal government announced a 5-year extension of both the federal homelessness program and the housing investment program, but froze that spending at a time when, of course, we need actually more. We've seen in the background federal housing investments have been sharply declining since the 1990s, since 1996. And indeed, there's been some very dramatic reports from Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation which report that federal housing program expenses reached a peak of $3 billion in 2010 when the federal stimulus budget was fully implemented, but by 2018 it's projected to be down by more than $1 billion to $1.9 billion. Now, that's not just money that is being lost, but the decline in federal investments in housing means the estimated number of households that are assisted under federal housing programs will also shrink at a time when there's growing housing need across the country. In 2010, the federal government reported that it was supporting 613,500 households. By 2018, the federal government says that it will be supporting 452,300 households. That's a loss of 161,200 households, or a reduction of 26% in all the federally funded affordable housing.
1 minute.
Thank you. More recent information since our brief was prepared from Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation reports that the number of new nonprofit homes funded by the federal government in 2013 was 546, which is the lowest since records were started in 1978, and the number of new housing co-ops funded by the federal government in 2013 was 0, which is the same number that it's been since 1994. So our brief does set out what we think are practical ways that the federal government can begin to reverse some of these issues, make sensible investments in terms of housing infrastructure, deliver the benefits directly to Canadians who, on a personal basis, will benefit from good housing, but also benefits to the community and indeed to the economy from these investments. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Colleagues, we will do 5 minutes rounds, and I'm hoping I can get consent to go about 20 minutes into the bells. Is that reasonable? Okay, thank you very much. We'll start with Mr. Cullen, please.
Thank you. Thank you to all our panelists. Mr. Beattie, I want to start with you. I may have missed it in your presentation. You're listed as a partner at KPMG. Are you specifically interested in infrastructure spending, or is it a broader, what capacity do you hold? I want to make my question specific.
Okay. I have spent the last 30 years in infrastructure. I ran the Canadian business for 10 years, and today I run KPMG's infrastructure business in the Americas and India.
So a question with who has primary responsibility, financial responsibility for much of the infrastructure that you referenced in your presentation? Who holds the primary responsibility for the infrastructure debt, the deficit that you're talking about?
The deficit?
Which level of government?
I think it's all three levels as it boils down, and this is entirely consistent with trends around the world. The problem is the three levels of government, or the two levels of government, depending on where you are, struggle to find the projects they want to invest in together. And I think that's one of the great challenges, is to get that consensus on what to invest in, where to invest, and when to invest.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the description you made around the deficit, the infrastructure deficit that we're running right now in this country is perhaps near or past crisis levels in terms of cost and scale. Is that a fair description, or are we not quite there yet? You didn't paint the most rosy picture of our infrastructure situation.
I think, again, there are two parts to it. And if you think about infrastructure and the great boom in infrastructure that began in the late 40s, early 50s, and into the 60s, all of that infrastructure is now middle-aged.
That's right.
And you didn't have to spend a lot of money. Again, people don't consume a lot when they're young. As things age, things begin to wear out. We are into that stage in life. So yes, we haven't maintained it as well, and we're now entering that phase in the life of our infrastructure.
Right. So my colleagues across the way will say, well, they've promised lots of money for infrastructure, not mentioning that almost all of it is backloaded into the 8th, 9th, and 10th year of the program. It doesn't suggest the type of urgency that may be required for aging and not well kept up infrastructure. A concern I have is that the so-called downloading to the cities in particular, who have requirements under law not to run deficit and also have the most limited ability to raise revenue. Are we not coming to a pinch point here where long-away promises are not going to meet the needs of today?
The real challenge is to determine when that occurs. And one of the great challenges that municipalities face, provincial governments face, and federal governments face is actually knowing the condition of the assets. And one of the things that I would urge all of the municipalities present and within earshot to do is make sure they really understand the physical condition of their assets.
Is there a role for the federal government in helping them? Is there a role for the federal government in helping them understand that?
There can be. Again, okay. part of this is just figuring out what the assets are, where they are, and the condition. They should be known and knowable. We can all make sure we do a better job. The problem with the infrastructure, with infrastructure assets that are installed, is everything feels good until they break. Sure. It's a bit like a car running out of oil. Everything feels good until the thing seizes. And so there is a pinch point. Is it today? Is it tomorrow? Is it 10 years from now?
But we know it's coming.
I'm not technically competent to say that, but we are entering that phase where expenditures are necessary.
Mr. Romoff, I understand as a promoter and fan of the P3 model, you highlight the places where it works. I want to talk for a minute about, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. There are instances when it has not worked in Canada. Is that fair to say?
There are actually no examples in Canada that where a P3 has gone ahead that it's been a failure.
Brampton Civic Hospital, according to the Ontario Auditor General, ran over $200 million, in part because it was a P3. The Sea to Sky Highway, $220 million over, due to the fact that it was organized as a P3. The UQAM, University of Quebec at Montreal, the rate of that investment cost the Quebec government $400 million, $200 million more than was originally budgeted. The City of Ottawa had to bail out two P3 projects entirely. To not describe some of those cost overruns to the taxpayer, because that's who eventually picked up the costs of these not failures, I suppose you would call them, is significant. So back to you, the P3s work in all situations, and there hasn't never been any kind of a failure of expectation or delivery to the public and to the taxpayer?
A couple of comments. Several projects you've mentioned are not P3s. So I would have that discussion with you about that.
Love to.
UTAM is one of those. It's not a public-private partnership. The second thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, P3s are not a panacea, but when they're done for the right reasons, and when the contracts are structured appropriately, they have delivered results for us time and time again. And that is true right across the country.
Those are two very large conditions for success if contractors operate in a proper way.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cullen. We'll go to Mr. Saxton, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being here today. I just want to begin by following up on a comment made by Mr. Cullen regarding funding for infrastructure, and I just want to confirm that our government has indeed provided over $53 billion in infrastructure funding over the next 10 years, and that is the largest and longest federal investment in job-creating infrastructure in Canadian history. Now, my first questions will be for the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships, Mr. Romoff. In your opening statement, you highlighted some of the benefits of P3 projects and also how Canada is leading the way in the world in this regard. Now, as you know, our government has been very supportive of P3s, and I just want to ask if you can identify some of the recent examples of P3s that have been successful and also helped to change the mindset around infrastructure funding.
Well, there are examples right across the country. We could start with British Columbia. The Canada Line, which is the transit system which connects the airport to downtown Vancouver, is an exemplary case of a successful public-private partnership. It is the best example in the sense that the private sector took on responsibility for the design, construction, financing, maintenance, and operations of that system. And that system was built at significant savings to the government of British Columbia, in excess of $90 million. And that particular transit system is exceeding estimated ridership levels that were an element of its feasibility at the beginning. And it is really quite a great example of P3s in action.
Yeah, that's an excellent example. I know many people who love taking that Canada Line. I know my 85-year-old father takes it to the airport, as a matter of fact, when he flies. Can you give us an example of when P3 projects make sense?
P3 projects make sense where you can demonstrate that the value for money for taxpayers is better than proceeding with more traditional design bid build approaches. And the advantage of a public-private partnership, there are several, but the principal advantage comes back to the point that Mr. Cullen was making earlier, which is that if you put in place a public-private partnership which includes life cycle maintenance of the facility, and require the private sector entity to assume responsibility for that maintenance over the period of 35 years. You may still have roads and bridges that are degrading, but it will be the responsibility of those consortia to make the repairs to meet the obligations of the contract, and furthermore to assume the cost. So if you have a look at the Champlain Bridge in Montreal, that bridge, of course, is now in need of serious repair, and in fact is going to be replaced. It was initially built as a traditional project, and as you know, the Government of Canada is moving ahead now on an accelerated basis to replace that bridge with a public-private partnership model, which will put the onus on the private sector consortium to ensure that it is maintained over the 35 years of that contract to a standard that was agreed to at the outset of that contract. So it puts the onus and responsibility on the private sector, and it holds the public sector exempt from those costs that normally end up being assumed by governments when projects are procured in the more traditional way.
Thank you very much. My next question is for Mr. Beattie from KPMG. Now, Mr. Beattie, if you could talk to us about the state of public-private partnerships in Canada, I would appreciate that. And also, our government understands the importance of P3s and have encouraged large projects to consider P3s as an effective funding option. And should more municipal projects be considered for P3s?
The first part of my response is the state of public-private partnerships is very healthy in Canada. It is one of the 2 or 3 jurisdictions around the globe that are held out as true state-of-the-art jurisdictions. It's characterized by a predictable flow of projects, by predictable timeframes for procurements, and public entities that are highly competent and sophisticated in the procurement of infrastructure. Those would be the big 3 from that perspective. In terms of the funding options, I'd take us back to my earlier remark, financing and funding. Most of that pertains to financing rather than funding.
Okay. Got about 15 seconds, Mr. Sachs.
15 seconds? Yeah. Well, I'll just ask very quickly to the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association about your opinion of our PRPPs, the pooled registered pension plans, as well as tax-free savings accounts, and how is this helping to encourage Canadians to save for their future?
Okay, a very brief response,
very brief.
Mr. Svedlov, yeah. Do you like them or do you not like them?
Have these been a good idea for Canadian savers?
Very brief response.
Very brief response on PRPPs. I think the fact that we're getting very wide support from a lot of the provinces, I think 4 provinces have now implemented. Ontario has announced that they will be implementing shortly. I think reflects the fact that there's widespread acceptance and the view that this is a real way of providing pension opportunities for people who don't have them in Canada.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Saxton. Mr. Bryson, please.
Canada has the greatest concentration of expertise in the design, construction, and financing of infrastructure in the world. And we're building airports and highway systems and water treatment plants and transit systems around the world. Yet our pension funds aren't investing that much in Canada. Why is this? Is it a matter of bundling? Should we be bundling projects together in similar asset classes and making them more investor-friendly?
This is a question probably best addressed by the pension funds, but I'll take a shot at it. I think there are a couple of things at play. With respect to pension funds, the bottom line is they tend to be risk-averse because they have to ensure they've got a continuing stream of returns on their investment in order that they can meet their pension obligations. And so their tendency is not to invest in greenfield projects because of that high risk, but rather to buy assets around the world or invest in brownfield projects.
That's an interesting point. Mr. Beattie, the Australian model of asset recycling, where the national government helps state governments recycle brownfield assets for greenfield investments, if you could explain to committee briefly how that would work in Canada.
The Australian model is a fascinating model. What it basically says is the federal government removes the tax disincentive associated with selling an asset by a state government as long as the money is reinvested in new infrastructure or rehabilitation of infrastructure. And this is a way to take some of the stock of capital and use it to finance new infrastructure or rehabilitation of infrastructure. We think it's a very powerful model for unlocking some of the inherent value in the assets. It allows for, it creates a new incentive and a new source of funding, financing, to allow the federal government and the state governments to build the new infrastructure that is necessary. Something similar to that, the structure of government is sufficiently similar that something like that could operate in a Canadian context. Again, adjusting for all of the institutional differences.
So if a province sold a brownfield asset like office buildings, as an example, to commercial real estate companies, say for $100 million, the Australian model would give them a 15% kicker from the federal government if they invested, say, $115 million into new infrastructure. The kind of greenfield space that pension funds may be averse to investing in the short term.
Yes. Now that's, yes, but when we look at it, that is a provincial government recycling its assets, not necessarily its infrastructure assets. The Australian model is quite focused on infrastructure asset recycling.
Asset that a provincial government would sell.
It could be an electric utility, it could be a toll road, it could be whatever. But the Australian model is quite focused on infrastructure asset recycling. You could choose to broaden it. Again, there are issues there. The Australian one appears to have achieved a real consensus around that.
But it's enabled Australia to take $13 billion of federal money in last year's budget and leverage it to create $60 billion worth of infrastructure investments.
I would say I would use the present tense rather than the past tense. It hasn't happened.
Okay,
it's in the process of happening.
With our low interest rates today and the low cost of money, slow growth, soft job market, and massive infrastructure needs, we have the IMF, OECD, and David Dodge all telling us that this is the time for a historic plan. Do we have an opportunity to make the kind of infrastructure play nationally led that would be the biggest we've ever done in Canada? Would you agree that there's the potential we can afford to do it? It just takes federal leadership to get it done.
I think the scale is on a scale equivalent to the boom I was talking about, late 40s, early 50s, and into the 60s. Yes, absolutely.
On housing, we talk about housing as infrastructure in a sense. Given that asset classes where people have an expectation of paying something often work best for public-private partnership, is there an opportunity for REITs and pension funds to invest in affordable housing in properly structured deals? Mr. Beattie or Mr. Shapcott?
Okay. Mr. Shapcott, brief response, please.
Yes, there is an opportunity. I am not an expert on the structuring of financing, but there are actually some interesting practices. Also, we know in the United States and the UK there have been some interesting practices I think we can bring forward.
Okay. Mr. Beattie, do you want to respond very briefly? Okay. Thank you so much. We'll move, thanks, Mr. Bryson. We'll move to Mr. Keddy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to our witnesses. A couple of specific questions. To Mr. Swedlove, you talked about the market demand for long-term bonds. So in 2014, we created $2.5 billion worth of 50-year government bonds. What type of potential infrastructure expenditures could that help to leverage?
Well, we're very pleased and supportive of the federal government initiative to introduce 50-year bonds. A number of provinces already put that in place, and we think it's a great opportunity for the government to finance its debt more cheaply, and also it's a good opportunity for us to invest in longer-term assets. So we're very supportive of that. If there's anything we would like to see, we would like to see more of that activity so that it become a benchmark that could be applied. I think separate from that, because it's essentially investing in government securities, is the opportunity to invest in P3 activity, which has either a debt or equity component. So it's quite different, but at the same time would be equally useful.
Thank you. And somehow I knew more was going to be in that answer. One of the other things you mentioned, and we heard it also from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the large urban mayors of Canada, and you're talking about standardization of documentation under projects for under $50 million. Right. Like how critical is that? I mean, and is that something that the government can address simply with without a legislative change? Is that a bureaucratic change?
Well, I think it's something that can be introduced. I think, be significant. I think to us it's a starting point, because if you have a standardization of documentation, then you could start looking at being able to bundle, for example, certain projects, and also you could look at lowering the lens by which P3 Canada applies at present, which is $100 million, which is a very high in our view if you can get some standardization of documentation. So we think that's a key first point and a key area that we can move on. It doesn't require any legislative change. What it requires is significant cooperation by the federal governments, the provincial governments, and private investors, and we think P3 Canada could take a lead in that regard.
And you know, the reality is that a lot of projects, we always talk about the huge projects, but there's lots of projects out there under $50 million, especially for some of the small, more regional municipalities. Mr. Romoff, you had, I know you wanted to comment there, so I'm going to give you the opportunity.
I was just going to add that you're absolutely right, Mr. Kelly, that the next iteration of P3s in Canada will be driven very much by municipalities and the Aboriginal communities across Canada. They will, by definition, be equally complex projects, but significantly smaller. And so there is a real need now to think about how we might recalibrate the P3 model in order to accommodate that next wave of projects. And I would add that part of the challenge for municipalities is the cost of the services that are necessary to enable them to proceed. So the cost of legal services, technical services, advisory services. If we could bundle those together into essentially a one-stop shopping facility, a plug-and-play, if you like, with municipalities, so if they have a project, they can go one place, get these services all in an integrated fashion and at a far less cost, it would make it a much more manageable proposition for them to move ahead with a P3.
Exactly, and thank you for that. To Mr. Beattie, you talked a little bit about the British model and the phase one of their infrastructure program and then the phase two. Can you relate for the committee that the dollars, like the first infrastructure funding that they rolled out, the cost of that, and then the second one and how much is increased?
What I was referring to was actually the programs rather than the funding envelopes. Yeah. The primary model that the first go round primarily focused on social infrastructure. The financial crisis occurred. The second national infrastructure plan swung quite significantly towards economic infrastructure. It was more at what are the important projects and in what order rather than a funding envelope, financing envelope. So it was very much deciding what projects to be built when, and I think that's the real message there. I would commend you to their website. It's actually quite a useful, process.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Ensuite, Madame Boutin-Suite pour 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Yes, thank you. Very quickly, Mr. Jacquot, in your document, you made 3 recommendations. If you could mention those 3 recommendations that you didn't have time to go over.
Recommendation, we believe that the federal government needs to increase its spending on its federal homelessness strategy. In 2013, it announced a 5-year extension, but it froze the funding, and we know that most of that money, 80%, goes to 10 large municipalities, the rest going to 51 smaller municipalities. So our first recommendation is to increase federal homelessness strategy funding by 10%. Secondly, the federal government announced in 2013 a 5-year extension of the investment in affordable housing program to $500 million annually. We're recommending it be doubled, I should say, to $500 million, because once again the funding was frozen at for a 5-year period when the need is growing. And thirdly, we join with many others, municipalities, housing organizations, and others in saying the federal government needs to reconsider its decision to allow an overall decline in federal housing investments. And this is one of the reasons why the federal government can make a $2 billion investment in affordable housing, as it did in 2009, and yet we can still be farther behind now than we were before, because in the background more money is being taken away.
I agree with you that this money spent on homelessness is an investment and not an expenditure. Speaking of homelessness now, in the 2013 budget, there was a reorientation of HPS that a great deal of the budget moved towards housing first. There were groups, though, that had difficulties with that. In Quebec, the LAPSEM, involved with the City of Montreal, felt that all the eggs were being put in the same basket. In Quebec, we have a more generalist approach, a community approach. Your comments.
The housing needs and the homeless needs across the country are different. They're different in Vancouver than they are, for instance, in a small community in rural Newfoundland and Labrador, and different again in downtown Toronto, where I happen to live, than, say, some parts of Quebec where you're more familiar with. So there isn't such a thing as a one-size-fits-all, and we're always very cautious when someone proclaims that there's a magic solution that will meet all the needs of the 200,000 plus homeless people in the country. Certainly Housing First is a very robust model. The federal government and the Mental Health Commission of Canada demonstrated through the At Home Chez Soi project that for the 3,000 homeless people that were part of that project, it was the difference literally between life and death. It was what resulted in housing stability. So we know that model works, but it doesn't work for everyone, and it shouldn't be imposed. Similarly, on the financing thing, we're saying the federal government does need to increase investments, but we also think the federal government needs to look for alternative and other investments as well, because we know that the federal government alone can't solve the housing and homelessness infrastructure needs of Canadians.
Merci. Monsieur Coulombe.
Thank you. Mr. Coulombe, you mentioned that 75% of the costs for infrastructure go to the municipalities. I know that recently in the new Building Canada program, there was no proportion of funding that would be set aside for the municipalities. If the municipalities have to pay so much and having to shoulder the major part of the infrastructure, what would you recommend to the federal government's next budget to deal with this problem? Well, what you say, yes, is correct. 75% falls back on the municipalities. You would have to find some sort of economic formula where the municipalities could also benefit from investment, because just in terms of the tax level, the federal government taxes 30 cents out of every dollar that goes back into the federal government's coffers. They have a return on the economic activity, but the municipality has nothing. We are increasing our efforts, of course, but we want to see increased participation on the part of the federal government so that our communities can continue their efforts. You also have to understand that Building Canada considerably helped the country, helped Canada get through the crisis. There was a spirit of cooperation between the federal government and the provinces, and that led to economic activity and growth. In 2014 alone, we created some 200,000 jobs through that program, infrastructure program. Thank you.
Colleagues, all of our guests for being here this afternoon. I apologize for the shortened time, but we have a vote in about 8 minutes, colleagues. So I encourage you to make your way to the House. Merci beaucoup à tous.
Thank you all.
To just mention to the committee that should they wish to learn a little more about public-private partnerships, the Council runs the largest conference in the world. Will be held in Toronto November 3rd and 4th.
There's a free ad for that. Good point. If there's anything further you wish the committee to see, please submit it to the clerk and I'll ensure all members get it. Okay. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.